One cool mechanic in Vigil is that whenever you blink in real life, you blink in the game. Vigil is a horror game that tracks your in real life blinking and translates that into the game. In the game, there are two key systems which work with this mechanic. Firstly, the eye scanners that are dotted around the level. You need to keep your eyes open whilst this scanning process happens. But secondly, and more importantly, every time you look away from the monster chasing you, they move. If you keep your eyes open in real life, they stay still, but every time you blink in real life, they move. This mechanic is obviously incredibly technically impressive and interesting, but gameplay wise it uses a periphery which isn't standardly used, especially in indie games, and uses it to immerse the player further in the experience. One cool mechanic in Heaven Does Not Respond is just the entire way you interact with the game. So without going too much into the story to avoid spoilers, the game has you sat down at a computer and your job is to decrypt and restore video files. Firstly, the hook of seeing these videos is there straight away, but how you actually do the decrypting is so visceral and tactile. You have to read instructions, try to play a video, open the command log and type in the error code you get from playing that video, find each file that has an error, and go through the process of restoring those files individually by completing either more traditional puzzles or more Ridley ones. The game throws a bunch of curveballs your way pretty early on, but one thing you have to constantly deal with is the operating system, which is the real cool mechanic here. You have to deal with long loading times, a bunch of windows on screen, but you can't have too many windows at once, otherwise the system overloads. All keyboard commands you'd expect, like Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V for copy and paste work. There's a browser which is functional for solving problems with the computer, and honestly, just too many systems and mechanics and cool features to count. Safe to say, the concept, design, and implementation for this game is entirely on point. Very impressed. One cool mechanic in Silent Hill F is how the fungus, vines, and red spider lilies guide the player through the most intense parts of the game. Silent Hill F is full of very densely packed levels, with claustrophobia being the key feeling the level designers were tasked to give the player through the level geometry. However, the winding paths, labyrinth-like forks in the roads, and minimal sightlines pose a challenge for these chase sequences that occur when the fog monster attacks. To solve this, the developers used a red-coloured representation of the infection to guide the player, specifically the vines on the floor. Wherever they grow towards, that's where you need to go. If the lilies start growing on a particular wall, that's probably the corner you need to turn around. If there's an area that's already densely packed with spider lilies and vines, you know not to go that way. This is something I noticed, but was designed with the intention of being subconscious signposting, and it really works. Other games have done this, but I can't think of one that's done it as well, using the themes to such a degree whilst combating such tight level design. One cool mechanic in Don't Look is that you play the game entirely blindfolded. Now that sounds like a nightmare at first, and believe me, it is. However, as you wander aimlessly around the first room, you realise something. Firstly, if you hit a point of interest, which is usually indicated by light or sound, you get a picture of the room on the screen. Now, the aim of any room is to always get out of that room, so the puzzle becomes, how can I get from where I know I am, which is say the fireplace, to the door in the picture? The more you play, the more the speckles of light, sounds, and faded shapes become more and more useful, and you really start to feel like you can make your way around the mansion you are trapped in despite not being able to see. Almost completely removing sight from the player is always such an interesting mechanic, but this one in particular I think is done pretty well. One cool mechanic in mouthwashing is that you will never see any character walk even if they are following you. Mouthwashing is a psychological horror game where every detail of this world is crafted to make you uneasy and unsettled. This one particular mechanic, which involves making any character follow you stop just before they come into your field of view, coupled with the fact that you can hear their footsteps just behind you, is just one of many cool mechanics to create such a disturbing environment. However, as a developer, one thing that I really find cool about this mechanic is that it's also a time saver for the developer. It is clear from the rest of the game that animation as a whole is used sparingly, potentially due to the fact that the team didn't have a specific animator or just enough time. There is only one walking animation used at all throughout the rest of the game, and most of the time characters are completely stationary. This, alongside being a great ingredient to the pot of terror that is mouthwashing, is also a genius solution to saving development time. One cool mechanic in Eyes of the Elderwood is how the magic works. So you start off the game with a gun, given to you by a frog in a swamp, of course. However, if you try left click, your hand will start pointing with purple emitting from the finger. weird. Then, if you right click, you will shoot. So the question in the player's mind is, what does left click actually do at this point? After a while, you will then stumble across some torn pieces of paper. On the back of them shows a shape and a clue as to what that shape means. Sure enough, if you draw that shape with your left hand, you will be able to cast spells. That alone is a cool mechanic. It's not completely unique, but a very well done and immersive implementation of spellcasting. But on top of that, it's the fact that you dual wield magic and a revolver at once, which for me is just great. One cool mechanic in Ratshaker is, well, the rat shaking mechanic. Ratshaker is a mouth-washing inspired horror walking sim where the player goes through the story with a rat clenched in their fist. The player can do two things to the rat. Of course they can shake the rat, but they can also squeeze the rat. Shaking the rat allows the player to build up their Ratshaker meter at the top of the screen, also to light up ways in the dark areas of the level, power up generators, and remove the infection. Squeezing the rat allows the player to use the Ratshaker meter to interact with objects such as doors or TVs or elevators. So first off, this mechanic is cool because of how many uses it has with just two inputs, but the real hero feature of this mechanic is the sound design. Because Ratshaker is a horror game, and especially as you get further and further in the game, every fibre of your body wants to keep quiet and in the shadows. However, you need to shake the rat in order to progress, and every time you do this, the rat screams. The volume, but also how the screams reverb off walls, really makes the player feel incredibly unsettled and vulnerable whenever they have to do this, which are two emotions every horror game has in mind for the player. One cool mechanic in Caput Mortem, 100% said that wrong, is the fact you control the camera and your hand separately. You use the mouse to move the camera, pretty standard, but to move your hand, you hold shift and left click at the same time. This mechanic is cool for two reasons. Firstly, the horror genre is just famous for control/viewpoint restrictions, and this is another good one. The fact that you cannot move your hand and change the direction you are looking in at the same time could lead to some really interesting moments, especially involving either time-sensitive puzzles, combat, or your hand holding a light source like a torch. However, the way this mechanic is executed is what makes it really cool. Even in just the first 10 minutes of gameplay, you already start to sink into that extra layer of immersion as your right hand, which controls the mouse, starts to feel more and more like the right hand on the screen. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and tune to GDL again for another cool mechanic. One cool mechanic in Reanimal is the way it utilizes light. Like in a lot of horror games, sight restrictions are key to creating atmosphere and an environment for the player to feel scared and uneasy, and Reanimal is no different with its heavy fog and the inability to move the camera. In the opening sequence of the game, the player is unable to move the camera or see much further than the edge of their boat, but they can see fuzzy lights from buoys in the distance. This immediately creates a very visceral feeling of fumbling around in the darkness, hoping you don't crash into a jagged rock or beach the boat or even just run into a monster of any kind. Then you are joined by a companion, which is where the game makes use of the fact that the right analog stick doesn't move the camera by allowing the player to move the other character's lantern around to shine light on the environment. Just the twin stick nature of this is really interesting, but the pacing of this introduction is a great way to sell the player that your companion matters and can be useful. All of this is present within the first 10 minutes of the game, which is incredibly impressive, especially considering a lot of time is actually spent setting the scene and allowing a couple of story beats. One cool mechanic in the Warrens is how the doors work. So this game is just all about doors, from its design to its presentation. The aim of the game is to collect all of the white cubes found in different corners of the levels, and to do that you need to go through a bunch of doors which teleport you to the places depicted on the photo in front of them. Levels are designed so that whenever you come across a new door inside a level, it takes you back to the motel room where you started, where all of the doors you have used are stood before you. Levels are designed so that whenever you come across a new door inside a level, it takes you back to the motel room, where all the doors you have used are stood before you. As you go through more and more of the level, this motel room becomes sort of a hub level for you to teleport to different parts of the level in different orders. Now, I played this game as part of Steam's Next Fest, and there is so much potential for puzzle and level design here just from this one mechanic. So many ways to switch up how the player progresses through the level and what order they do things in. Also, just to add, this game 100% looks rough around the edges, but from playing it you can clearly see there has been a hell of a lot of thought and care put into this demo, and I'm sure the rest of the game too. 100% worth checking out. One cool mechanic in Platform 8 are the hints hidden in plain sight. Unlike the sequel to this prequel, Platform 8 gives the player a helping hand in figuring out how to get past anomalies via the LCD screens atop the doors to the carriage. Sometimes when you come up against an anomaly, but have no idea how to get past them without forcing a restart, if you take a look at the LCD screens, it might give a helpful hint, like, don't look at them. In a game where the goal is to get to the 8th carriage, and one false move can send you right back to the start, little hints like this can avoid the player just having a guide up on the other screen, which removes a lot of the fun and takes the player out of the experience.